Hey there, I'm ToriSor, and welcome back to Ranking TMNT Characters. Today we are going to be ranking versions of Karai. Now I have yet to put together a Karai cosplay, so I decided to do this sort of closet cosplay Karai inspired look for the video. Also, I am filming this during a thunderstorm, so there is a non-zero chance the power's gonna go out while filming. So I hope that doesn't happen. Either way, let's get into the ranking. In last place is Karai from the 2010s live-action films. When first watching these movies, I was initially really excited that they included Karai in these films, but she is unfortunately not an interesting character. In the first film, she mostly just serves as a point of communication between the Foot, Shredder, and Eric Sachs, and outside of that doesn't stand out as having a particularly memorable personality. Karai has even less of a presence in Out of the Shadows, with the oversaturated cast of characters pushing her even further into the background. I genuinely don't even remember her uttering a single word in Out of the Shadows. She was only really in this movie because she was in the first film and as an additional obstacle for the heroes to fight. At number 4, I have the first on-screen adaptation of Karai from the 2003 animated series. I think she was set up to be such an interesting character with her unconditional dedication to her alien blob of a father, paired with the back and forth with Leo about doing the right thing at the start of the series, but ultimately we don't really see her character go anywhere with that, especially with Karai becoming the Shredder and following in her father's footsteps. Speaking of, Karai as the Shredder had a lot of potential, and I was really excited when it was introduced, but I feel like she didn't do much as the Shredder either. We did get some of Shredder Karai posing a threat to the turtles, such as demolishing their lair, but she was pretty quickly usurped by Tengu Shredder in Season 5, and she never held a candle to the threat that was Utrom Shredder. Although other versions of Karai have pretty clear motivations when it comes to doing their duty as their honor commands, sometimes siding with the turtles for a temporary pact, or even being a good person at their core, 2003 Karai constantly flip-flops between being solely dedicated to the Foot and their interests, and being a good person that sides with the turtles. It felt like they were potentially setting up a redemption for her with the constant emphasis on her being a good person at her core, but that never paid off. She did side with the heroes to take down Tengu Shredder, and it almost seemed like she was on the turtles' side by the end of the series, especially with her being a guest at Casey and April's wedding. But then she turns around to side with Utrom Shredder and Turtles Forever, and only turns against him again because he was planning on destroying the entire multiverse. It just felt like they didn't know what to do with her, which just muddled her characterization overall. I really wish they picked a lane and stuck with it with 2003 Karai, because she does not have a clear direction whatsoever. In third place is Karai from Rise of the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Karai founded the Hamato clan to directly counter her father, who was corrupted into the Shredder, which speaks a lot to the complexities of her character. Tragically, we don't see much of her due to Season 2 being cut in half, and thus the season finale being much more fast-paced. However, in the short moments that Karai interacts with her family, she shows so much love for them. I really wish we could have seen the individual adventures she was supposed to have with each of the turtles, but the Karai we did see was great. One of my favorite moments in the entire series is when she tells April that she has always been part of the Hamato family. It's incredibly heartwarming. My big issue with Rise Karai, outside of her only being around for 2 episodes, is that she doesn't feel like Karai. Although I generally commend Rise for switching up the formula in a lot of ways, and I think this interpretation of Karai is very compelling, I generally prefer her typical morally gray characterization. But I still think Rise Karai is a lot of fun, and she deserved way more screen time than she was given. At number 2 is Karai from the 2007 animated film. Like with many of the 2007 characters, she doesn't stand out as particularly unique, but serves her purpose in the film. Although she was very much a side character, I did enjoy how they emphasized honor and the way she and the Foot ended up helping Winters break his curse and fight against his power-hungry family. A crucial trait that I'd love to see highlighted with Karai is that she is very much guided by the Foot and her own interest, and has a very strong understanding of what she wants, which 2007 Karai captures beautifully. I also love her sass when April and Casey are bickering in the car, and she's like,
"You would think they would be more concerned about the 13th monster."
Of all of the on-screen Karais, she feels the most grounded, and like the writers had a really solid understanding of who Karai is as a character. If we had gotten more of this version of Karai and a better understanding of her story and motivations, she could have easily taken the number 1 spot as the best on-screen adaptation of the character. She is the only on-screen Karai that I don't have any major issues with. Unfortunately, like with Rise Karai, we didn't see enough of her to truly understand who she is, but I ultimately decided to put her above Rise Karai simply because I prefer this characterization to how she's portrayed in Rise. In first place is Miwa from the 2012 animated series. Of all of the on-screen versions of of Karai, she is by far the most developed and interesting to talk about. Her story is really emotional, and she has a fantastic journey with her identity throughout the series. She very much feels like what I think they were trying to achieve with 2003 Karai, where she's very much on her own path and somewhat guided by morals, but is still acting out of her best interest. 2012 Karai is also very determined and has a bit of sass to her, which is far more personality than most versions of Karai have displayed.
She'll see all our gear!
Yeah, because if Shredder finds out you have an ice cream lamp, it is over.
I do think there was a lot of missed potential with Karai, and she could have done more towards the end of the series instead of being put out of commission for a lot of it with her mutation. But that plot paired with the mind control was actually a lot of fun and a very unique use of her role in the series. I'm also obsessed with her being Hamato Yoshi's lost daughter and her discovery of that devastating secret. The tragedy of losing her mother gains so much more weight when the man that raised her turns out to be the one responsible for her death. It's deliciously dramatic. Although I did want to see more of Karai being a sister to the Turtles, I am really glad that they emphasized her forging her own path, especially with her taking over the Foot in seasons 4 and 5. Again, it feels like a much more realized version of 2003 Karai adopting the role of the Shredder, with 2012 Karai's motivations making a lot more sense with her arc throughout the series. But of course, there is one major flaw with 2012 Karai, and that is the whole Leo situation. While most of that whole mess falls on Leo, even after learning that he's her brother, she flirts with him as a distraction, which is so weird for her to do. Fortunately, it is a very minor aspect of her role in this series, but it's still worth mentioning as it is my biggest issue with her. Otherwise, 2012 Karai is a lot of fun. I really wish TMNT provided more opportunities for Karai to shine like she does in this series. Although I am limiting these character rankings to on-screen adaptations of the characters, since there are a lot of comics and I have yet to read all of them, I will make an exception if my favorite version of the character comes from a comic iteration. And so, as an honorable mention, my favorite version of Karai comes from the IDW comic continuity. Like I mentioned when discussing the on-screen versions of the character, I prefer when Karai is characterized as very morally gray, only really working in her own interests, which does occasionally mean siding with the protagonists, but she is by no means a consistent ally. In IDW, she starts off as an antagonist and loyal to the Shredder, as well as the reason Jenica gets mutated after brutally stabbing her in the gut. Throughout the series, she progressively adopts a more neutral stance. She's definitely not an ally to the Turtles and still acts in her own interests, but occasionally those interests involve a tentative partnership. One of my favorite Karai moments comes from her demanding April give her $1, and once it's in her hand, she says, "Money has changed hands. You have hired the Foot Clan, Miss O'Neill," which is not only hilarious, but so representative of how transactional relationships with Karai are. Plus, she's got a sick, tatted up girlfriend, and you know what? Good for her. I do really need to get around to reading more of the original comics to get a sense of what Karai was originally like, but until then, IDW Karai will firmly remain my favorite version of the characters, as all of the on-screen adaptations leave something to be desired. And honestly, it's a big reason why I haven't developed Genesis Karai that much yet, because I want to make sure I do her justice. But with that, let's talk about what I have planned for hers so far. As far as backstory goes, Karai was raised in the Foot Clan in Japan by her parents Tang Shen and Oroku Saki. Because she is the spitting image of Shen, her fatherhood was never called into question. However, she is not Saki's biological daughter. The only ones who know this are Shen and Saki, since they've never consummated their arranged marriage. But from an outside perspective, Karai was born about 9 months after their marriage, and thus there was no reason to question her parentage. However, Karai's true father is Hamato Yoshi, who had a secret romance with Tang Shen prior to the arranged marriage. This secret romance was only known to them and Saki, and Yoshi left for the United States to work for TCRI prior to learning that Shen was expecting his child. Shen and Saki raised Karai as their child, and eventually adopted a young orphan named Himiko, who would be Karai's little sister. I'll expand more on Shen's death, specifically when I get to talking about Shredder's story, but for now, I'm gonna jump ahead to when the main story of Genesis would start. Karai is sent to the United States to spy on TCRI because Saki knows that they had some interesting developments going on over there, especially because Yoshi was such a strong advocate for TCRI. Saki wants to see if they would make good allies and if they would potentially be able to develop super soldiers for the Foot. Karai is the one that initially makes contact with TCRI to form that alliance. alliance. The foot helps TCRI eliminate their enemies more discreetly, and eventually, when the turtles start messing up their shit, Karai calls upon the Shredder to join them in New York. Beyond this, I don't really know what I specifically want Karai's arc to look like, but I do know that I want it to be sort of a mix of 2012 and IDW, where she very much acts in her own interests, but has a bit more of an incentive to side with the turtles once learning about her true parentage. Speaking of, I want to emphasize that despite Yoshi being Karai's biological father, Saki is much more of a father to her than Yoshi is, being the one that raised her. Unlike in 2012, Saki isn't inherently evil, just a victim of tragedy that turned to conquering as an unhealthy coping mechanism for his loss. Even though he makes morally questionable decisions sometimes, he's always been a good father to Karai and Himiko. Although Karai is initially upset with him for not being honest about Yoshi being her father, they do eventually repair their relationship. I also think at this point in the story, Karai and Saki likely would have split to do their own things. I think maybe Karai would take over the foot and become the new Shredder. It really just depends on what the story's gonna look like at this point, which I haven't fully developed yet. I'm not exactly sure what the story will look like at that point because I still have a lot more to map out from beginning up to then, but I do know that I want them to separate and kind of go on their own journeys at a certain point. Unlike the other Genesis characters I've discussed so far, I do not currently have a voice claim for Karai, so I would love to hear any suggestions you may have for her voice, as well as general characteristics you like to see in Karai as a character. A few people have commented asking where else they can see TMNT Genesis, and unfortunately outside of these videos, some art, and my personal planning, there really isn't much out right now. However, I do eventually want to start properly writing the main story and putting it on AO3. I do currently have a prologue written from I think a year ago at this point. I do need to get back to writing more of it, but I just haven't gotten around to it yet. I have so many other projects and things that I'm working on that it's been on the back burner. I will link to the master post on my Tumblr for TMNT Genesis in the description, and I'm also going to start linking that on all of the character rankings in which I discuss Genesis versions of the characters. That Tumblr post has links to a bunch of the different art I made, as well as my AO3, which again, I am hoping to update with more stories eventually. I just have not gotten around to it. Ideally, I would love for TMNT Genesis to be a comic, but I unfortunately do not have the time, energy, or skill level to commit to a project that big. I am just one person, so for now I'm just going to be sticking to my art, videos, and AO3 stories when I get to them. I'm sorry there isn't more Genesis content for y'all to engage with because I am thoroughly enjoying developing these characters and I want to share them with you in a more interesting capacity, but that's exactly why I wanted to talk about them at the end of these ranking videos, just to get my ideas out into the universe and this AU out into the universe when it's kind of difficult for me to really make a physical product of what I've been developing, if that makes sense. I'm so glad so many of y'all are excited about TMNT Genesis because it's been so much fun to develop these characters and this world and the story, and I do really want to get back to it soon. But that does it for this character ranking. Let me know if you agree with my assessments and which version of Karai is your personal favorite. I think next time I'm probably gonna rank Bebop and Rocksteady since that'll be a pretty short video as well, and then I will get back to ranking another one of the turtles. So make sure to subscribe and keep an eye out for that poll when I will be determining which turtle I'll be ranking next. I have already ranked the Donatellos as well as April O'Neil and Casey Jones, so make sure to check out those videos if you haven't already. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please give it a like if you did. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see y'all next time.